Imagine someone who is betrayed not by the enemy, but by those he once embraced as friends. That is the fate of Yu Menglong, the actor who is now trapped inside room 309. Hundreds of cameras are watching him like a heartless surveillance system. A viral video shows him raising his hand with a silent gesture. It is as if he is begging the world for someone to see it. But the most piercing part is not the fear, but the familiar faces behind the glass. Song Yen, Fan Shiki, Chong Xinong, and Du Chang. The very people he once trusted are now the walls closing in on his life. They witnessed his collapse and remained silent. And when Menglong attempted to escape during the single second a monitor malfunctioned, who stopped him? Not a foreign guard, but them. 2 months passed, and a leaked piece of footage surfaced. A shadow appeared, and suddenly the traitors began to feel haunted by their own sins. Because the truth had begun to find its way out. Peace be upon you, and Allah's mercy and blessings, my friend. May we all always remain under Allah's protection. Before we continue, do not forget to subscribe, like, and write a comment about where you come from so we can pray for each other. In a high-security room, the light from the lamp reflects only faintly off the metal walls. Where Yu Menglong lives like a shadow, hundreds of hidden cameras stare without blinking. Every slight movement, even when he takes a deep breath, is instantly recorded, analyzed, and magnified. Life is no longer life. He is like a prisoner, locked in by technology and fear. Room 309 is a world that knows no mercy. The viral video shows Menglong slowly raising his hands to form a small gesture filled with fragile hope. His hands trembled from old wounds and the pain of past failed escape attempts. He did not dare to speak. Even the slightest sound could trigger punishment. So he tried to communicate with his eyes and his shaking fingers, hoping someone out there would understand his silent call. But the most devastating element is not the camera or the room, but the four faces behind the glass. Songyan, Fan Shiki, Chong Chinong, and his former trusted manager, Du Chang. They stood behind thick security glass observing him like a test subject. The people who once swore to protect him have now become part of the system that imprisons him. This betrayal hurts more than any physical blow. One night, one of the monitors malfunctioned for exactly 1 second. That single second felt to Menglong like a door to the outside world had opened. Summoning his remaining strength, he ran toward the door. His body slammed into the metal panel. Alarms exploded. The lights flashed and the smoke detectors activated. And the four people appeared behind the glass, watching him without even the slightest intention to help. His final hope was shattered. After that blurry escape attempt, the next 2 months passed like a nightmare that would not end. All recordings were edited, the audio was removed. The public narrative was carefully controlled. Menglong's name vanished from the news, from the internet, from the world that once adored him. But behind the silence, something began to move, something that no metal wall could contain. The truth. At 0217, an anonymous file appeared on underground forums. The CCTV footage was dark and damaged. However, the moments when Menglong tried to escape were clearly visible. His hands were bleeding. His breathing was labored. Then, a large shadow entered the frame before the screen went completely black. This recording shook the internet. There were things hidden inside it, things that did not align with the official narrative. Fan Shiki was the first person to be consumed by guilt. Every night, he replayed the silent signals in his dreams. He knew the recording was real because he had previously deleted the original version. Menglong's voiceless plea stuck to his mind like a curse. Shiki began to fear looking at his own reflection in the mirror. He feared sleeping, and he feared waking up. Songyan remained silent, but a storm raged inside his chest. He kept a secret journal inside a drawer of his desk, filled with accounts of his actions, his regret, and truths he did not dare to speak. He realized that Night was wrong, but he feared Chong Chinong's threat. He feared that his career could vanish in an instant. He feared a world that does not choose the just, but the powerful. Meanwhile, Dushang became the most paranoid. On the surface, he looked strong, but behind closed doors, he checked the locks repeatedly. Every sound of footsteps made him jump. Because he holds the greatest secret. The audio from that night was never truly deleted. Someone had copied it, and if that audio were ever released, the entire narrative would collapse. Lies began to crack. Slowly but surely, the world started asking questions. Netizens started digging. People within the system began whispering to each other. And behind all of that, the silent gestures that once went unnoticed began to echo through the halls of power. Because truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way. Inside the darkness of room 309, a place meant to be a space for rest had turned into a silent prison without bars. Yu Menglong stood with a body growing weaker day by day. The pale white light hanging from the ceiling flickered like it was mirroring his unsteady breath. Every corner of the room was filled with small cameras staring without remorse, like hundreds of eyes designed to destroy what little privacy he had left. He felt as though this world had no space left for a human named Menglong, and all that remained was a subject under surveillance. No human voice was heard, only the smooth, constant hum of the machines, cold and devoid of compassion. Sometimes, when the night was unbearably long and his mind began to fracture, he spoke softly to himself. It was as if he was trying to reassure himself that he was still alive, still present. But his voice was swallowed again by the silence of the metal walls. The feeling of being trapped deep within his soul created wounds far more painful than any physical injury. In this frozen world, he learned that silence can be the most brutal punishment. The viral video that showed his trembling hands captured only a fraction of his despair. Behind that signal were fear, pain, and a hope that was nearly extinguished. Each time he moved his fingers to form a small gesture, he was battling not only the CCTV, but also the fear that no one would care. His hands still bore scars from old injuries that sometimes throbbed, reminding him that he had tried to escape and failed. The wound was not just physical, but a warning that the system confining him was far stronger than his determination. As he raised his hand, he did it slowly. He observed the rhythm of the flashing lights in the corner of the room, counting seconds and gauging whether someone out there might read the message he concealed. His eyes filled with tears, not just from pain, but from helplessness, squeezing his chest. He wanted to scream, but he knew that even the slightest sound would trigger the sensors. So, he chose his own method. Subtle signs that only someone truly paying attention with their heart could understand. The most crushing part was not the room itself. It was not the cameras. It was not the light that never went off. It was the four faces behind the surveillance glass. The faces he once trusted. The faces that once greeted him with laughter now looked at him as if he were lifeless. Song Yan, who once patted him on the shoulder before filming, now stared without emotion. Fan Shiki, once a friend and a confidant during his early career, was now the one who deleted the evidence Menglong tried to send out. Chong Chinong, his mentor, the man he considered his teacher, who helped shape him into an actor, now stood as the puppeteer behind the entire surveillance system. And Dushang was the one who shattered his heart the most. The manager who once held his hand when he was scared during his early career was now the one holding the key to the locked room, choosing to let him remain trapped. Each time Menglong saw them behind the glass, it felt as though his chest was being pierced from the inside. He could not comprehend how affection turned into surveillance, how friendship turned into threat, how those who once helped him became the greatest barrier between him and his freedom. There is nothing more devastating than realizing that your greatest enemies are the people you once called family. One night, when the room felt quieter than usual, a monitor in the corner flickered on and off for exactly 1 second. Just 1 second. But for Menglong, it felt like a brief opening to the heavens. Adrenaline surged through his body. All his time spent observing LED patterns, machine noise rhythms, and slight pauses in the system aligned at that moment. Without hesitation, he ran toward the door, slamming his body into it with all his remaining strength. Pain shot through his bones. But he kept pushing. For that fraction of a second, he believed something on the hinges had shifted. However, before he could react further, the alarm erupted like a storm, crushing the small hope he had nurtured for months. Red lights spun. Sirens wailed. And from behind the large glass, the four haunting faces appeared once more. They said nothing. They did not move. They did not display even a trace of empathy. They just stared, and that destroyed Menglong more than the alarm or the metal door. At that moment, he realized that it was not the system preserving itself, but the human heart surrendering to cruelty. After the failed escape, the next 2 days felt like hell moving slowly. Each day felt identical, awakening, sitting, staring at the wall, waiting alongside the machines, waiting for something that may never arrive. The outside world no longer mentioned his name. News of him vanished. Recordings showing his struggle were erased, fabricated to appear as if he had merely chosen to rest. But behind the suffocating silence, there was a small vibration that truth could not suppress. Even while imprisoned, Menglong began to observe the smallest details. The flickering lights, routine patterns, the sound of unsynchronized footsteps, faint shadows behind the glass. Something was different. Something was secretly moving through cracks in a system that once appeared flawless. For the first time in a long while, he felt a spark of hope he could not understand. Perhaps someone out there was fighting for him, or perhaps someone within the system itself had begun to waver. Even though he did not know what was happening, he believed one thing: no matter how long truth is locked away, it will always find a way out. At 02:17, a moment emerged that no one could have anticipated. The outside world was silent. The city was asleep. But in an underground forum where people spoke anonymously, a post appeared like a whisper from another realm. The file was small, only a few seconds of shaky, damaged CCTV footage. It looked as though it had been taken from a camera long presumed dead. Yet the damage made it seem even more authentic and terrifying. In the clip, Menglong appeared breathless. His body was unstable. His injured hand struggled to push the door. His voice could not be heard, but his movement revealed a desperate plea for freedom. The camera felt as if someone had held it tightly, filming secretly from inside the control room. This was not official footage, but a forbidden recording. A recording that was never meant to exist. And in the final second, a large shadow entered the frame before the screen went entirely black. The world trembled. Some whispered that it was Songyan's shadow. Others said it was Fanshiki. But most believed the shadow belonged to someone who should never have been inside room 309 at that time. Something deeper, darker, had begun to crack the well-constructed narrative. Fanshiki became the first to be dragged into the abyss of guilt when the footage leaked. Before this viral incident, he slept easily, ate comfortably, and lived as if he had committed no sin. However, ever since that video appeared, his nights turned into relentless nightmares. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw Menglong's trembling hands, saw his pleading eyes, saw the quiet gesture he had once chosen to ignore. He remembered how he deleted the original recording, how he pressed the delete button while convincing himself that he was merely following orders, that he was just a minor piece in a larger system. But now he could no longer hide from the truth behind his actions. It felt as though the air of the entire world weighed upon his chest. He began hearing Menglong's voice inside his dreams, an unheard voice tearing apart his peace. Fanshiki started fearing the reflection of himself in the mirror. He saw someone he despised. Someone who had once been a friend to his closest friend. Each morning, he woke up with red eyes, tightness in his chest, and questions piercing his mind like thorns. If I do not speak now, am I still human? Song Yan did not show visible anxiety, but the storm within him was greater. He was known to be calm, structured, and always thoughtful with his words. But since that night, since the moment Menglong tried to escape, since the panic that was visible through the glass, Song Yan has been keeping a thin journal that he only opens when everyone else is asleep. On every page, he writes down memories. How he and Menglong used to laugh together while training. How they supported one another before important auditions. How Menglong once lent him his jacket on a rainy day. The following pages are filled with regret. Long words he never had the courage to say. He wanted to help Menglong that night. He wanted to knock on the glass, to whisper something sincere. But fear held his body still. He was afraid of losing his job. Afraid of being expelled from an industry that never forgives mistakes. Afraid of Chong Chinong's threat, stay silent if you want to survive. Now, every time he opens his journal, his hands tremble. He realizes that silence is the most brutal form of betrayal. And that journal is now the silent witness to his inner battle between protecting himself or defending the truth. Unlike Shiki and Songyan, Duchang has become someone imprisoned by his own fear. On the outside, he still appears to be a professional manager who smiles. But behind the door of his home, his world has turned into a maze of paranoia. He often checks the windows in the middle of the night to ensure he is not being followed. He closes the curtains even during the day. He avoids crowds and never lets his phone out of reach. Every notification causes him to break into a cold sweat. Every sound of footsteps in the hallway makes him flinch. He knows something that no one else knows. The audio of the night Menglong collapsed was never truly erased. He watched the footage before it was deleted. He heard the impact. He heard the frantic breathing and the short words that froze his heart. He watched someone quietly copy the file, someone he had never seen before. When he realized the consequences if the audio were released, he began seeing the world as a landscape filled with traps. He lives in fear of the past chasing him. And every night he wonders if he can still outrun the truth that is already on its way toward him. The small crack that began with the leaked file slowly widened into a massive rupture that shook the foundation of the entire system. Lies that once felt solid now crumble one by one. Netizens, who were once skeptical, began connecting the scattered facts. Those involved started blaming each other, sending secret messages, as if they all sensed that a powerful storm was approaching and there would be nowhere to hide. And amid all the chaos, one thing was clear. The silent signals that once went unnoticed have never truly faded. Those signals have now transformed into a resounding echo that shocks the world. People who thirst for justice are rising. Menglong's life may have been shattered by a system built upon betrayal, but his courage, his small gestures, and his final hopes now live in the hearts of those who believe that truth cannot be buried. That signal is no longer a plea. It is a call to lift the veil that has concealed the truth all this time, a call to end the injustice that silenced a human voice. And that echo is now too loud to ignore.